I heard them before I saw them. Her laughter, high and tinkling like expensive crystal, floating up the staircase of my 3-story Victorian home. My home. Though Thomas hadn't seemed to remember that particular detail when he texted me this morning, working late tonight. Don't wait up. A common enough message these past few months. So common that I'd stopped questioning it weeks ago. What was the point? The distance between us had grown from a crack to a chasm, and I'd been busy with other matters. More important, matters. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. You'll love the master bedroom, I heard Thomas say, his voice carrying that particular tone he used when trying to impress someone. The view of the garden is spectacular, especially at sunrise. How would he know? Thomas hadn't seen a sunrise. In our bedroom in years, always sleeping until his alarm blared at 7:30 sharp. I, on the other hand, watched the dawn break over my carefully tended roses every morning, cup of coffee in hand, laptop open, empire growing. I stayed perfectly still. In my home office, the small study Thomas had magnanimously given me when we moved in 4 years ago. He'd never bothered to ask why I'd wanted this particular room, with its hidden wall panel concealing a small private elevator to the basement and secondary exit. He'd been too busy claiming the larger study downstairs with its imposing mahogany, desk and wall of empty bookshelves he'd never filled. "This house is incredible," the woman cooed. "I can't believe you own a place like this in this neighborhood." I smiled at that. A cold, small smile that would have alarmed Thomas had he seen it, but Thomas hadn't truly seen me in years. "Family money," Thomas replied vaguely, the lie sliding from his lips with practiced ease. "Old Boston stock, you know how it is." Another lie. Thomas had grown up solidly middle class in a Chicago suburb, son of a physics teacher and a nurse. The only old stock in his lineage was a great-grandfather who'd owned a moderately successful butcher shop. I knew because I'd had him thoroughly investigated before our first date. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Their footsteps moved toward the master bedroom, and I silently opened my laptop, pulling up the security cameras I'd had installed throughout the house. A precaution Thomas had dismissed as paranoid before promptly forgetting about their existence. There she was, young, mid-20s if I had to guess, blonde, leggy, wearing a dress that probably cost a week of her salary, admiring my bedroom with wide, covetous eyes while Thomas watched her with equal hunger. "So when can I move my things in?" she asked, trailing perfectly manicured fingers across my Egyptian cotton duvet. "This weekend," Thomas said, pulling her close. "I've already told my wife I want a separation. She'll be moving out by Friday." Would I now? How interesting, considering this was the first I'd heard of it. I closed the laptop silently, leaning back in my chair as I contemplated the situation. Thomas wanted me gone. Thomas was planning to move his mistress into my house. Thomas had somehow forgotten who exactly had purchased this house, renovated this house, and paid for every stick of furniture and artwork within it. Thomas had forgotten many things, it seemed. I opened a secure messaging app on my phone. "Eliza, please clear. My calendar for the rest of the week. Family emergency." The response came immediately. "Of course, Ms. Harlow. Anything else you need?" I thought for a moment, listening to Thomas giving his girlfriend a tour of what he clearly thought was about to become her new home. "Actually, yes. Call Marcus at legal. Tell him I need the contingency files pulled. And contact Diane at security. Code Chimera. Right away. Should I inform the board? Not yet. I'll handle that personally. Thank you, Eliza." I slipped my phone into the pocket of my tailored slacks and stood, smoothing invisible wrinkles from my silk blouse. In the hallway mirror, I checked my reflection. Auburn hair in a perfect chignon, pearl earrings catching the afternoon light. expression composed and unreadable. Let Thomas bring his girlfriend into my home. Let him promise her my bedroom, my garden, my life. I'd built an empire from nothing once before. I could certainly handle one wayward husband and his mistress. When Thomas came upstairs 2 hours later, having finally shown his girlfriend out, with promises of their new life together, he found me sitting calmly at the kitchen island, laptop open, reading glasses perched on my nose. He startled visibly. "Emily, I thought you were at your book club tonight." "Clearly," I replied, not bothering to look up from my screen. I could see his reflection in the gleaming refrigerator door, his slightly flushed face, the way his hand immediately went to straighten his tie. An obvious tell from a man who considered himself an excellent poker player. Thomas cleared his throat. "We need to talk." "Do we?" I continued typing an email to my CFO, approving the acquisition of a small tech company we'd been circling for months. $50 million. A decade ago, that figure would have made my palms sweat. Now it was barely worth a second thought. "I want a separation," Thomas said, his voice taking on that rehearsed quality I recognized from his sales presentations. "It's not working between us anymore, Emily. We both know that." I closed my laptop and removed my reading glasses, finally looking at him directly. Thomas was handsome in that polished corporate way, salt and pepper hair expensively cut, tailored suit hiding the slight softening of middle age, confident stance of a man accustomed to being the most important person in any room. How desperately he clung to that illusion. "When were you planning to tell me?" I asked mildly. "Before or after you moved your girlfriend into our home?" His eyes widened fractionally before he controlled his expression. "I don't know what you're talking about." I tapped a manicured finger against my closed laptop. Blonde, about 25, wearing a red dress that showed rather more leg than appropriate for a Tuesday afternoon. Seemed quite taken with the master bedroom. Thomas's face flushed darker. "You were spying on me? In my own home?" I prefer to call it maintaining awareness. "This is exactly why our marriage isn't working," he snapped. "The constant suspicion, the controlling behavior. I need space, Emily. I need a younger woman who looks at you like you're the center of the universe," I supplied, rising from my seat. "How predictable, Thomas. I expected better from you," he straightened, anger flashing in his eyes. "I want you out by Friday. The house is in my name." And there it was, the fundamental misconception around which Thomas had built his entire plan. "Is it?" I asked softly. "You know it is. We agreed when we bought it." "When I bought it," I corrected, "your name isn't on the deed." "No," I agreed. "But neither is yours. The house is owned by Harlow Holdings, LLC, a fact you'd know if you'd bothered to read any of the paperwork you signed." Thomas stared at me, confusion flickering across his face. "That's my holding company." "Is it?" I asked again, with the same soft, dangerous tone. "Are you sure about that, Thomas?" A thread of uncertainty crept into his expression. Thomas was many things: charming, ambitious, self-centered, but detail-oriented was not among his qualities. It was one of the reasons I'd married him. That, and his presentable appearance, social ease, and willingness to accommodate my work schedule, he'd been a perfect corporate husband for a time. "I'm the primary breadwinner," he said, but I could hear the doubt creeping in. "My name is on the mortgage." "There is no mortgage, Thomas. I paid cash." I picked up my laptop and tucked it under my arm. "But please, feel free to contact your lawyer. I'm sure he'll be happy to explain your financial situation to you. At his usual $600 an hour." I walked past him toward the doorway, then paused. "Oh, and Thomas, your girlfriend left her scarf in the foyer. Hermes, if I'm not mistaken. You might want to return it to her. God knows she won't be able to afford another on her paralegal's salary." His head snapped up. "How did you— Good night, Thomas. Don't wait up for me. I'll be working late. I closed the door on his stunned expression, allowing myself the smallest smile as I climbed the stairs to my private office. The wheels were already in motion. By the time Thomas realized what was happening, it would be far too late to stop it. He wants a separation, I informed Marcus calmly the next morning, seated across from him in his corner office in downtown Boston. The entire city skyline spread out behind him, the harbor glittering in the distance. Marcus Gray had been my attorney for 15 years, long before Harlow Technologies had become the quiet behemoth it now was, back when I was just a determined woman with a patent and a business plan that most investors had laughed at. Marcus hadn't laughed. Marcus had recognized the same ruthless intelligence in me that had made him the youngest partner in his firm's history. "And you're certain there's another woman?" he asked, making notes on his legal pad. "She's already picked out her side of the closet," I replied. "Young, blonde, works as a paralegal at Chambers and Reed. Thomas is apparently planning to move her in this weekend." "Ambitious," Marcus remarked, raising an eyebrow. "And stupid. Thomas has always had an inflated sense of his own position." I crossed my legs, smoothing the fabric of my charcoal pencil skirt. "He believes the house is his, along with, I suspect, a significant portion of my assets." Marcus's lips thinned. "Your prenuptial agreement is ironclad. Thomas thinks he's found a loophole. According to my sources, he's been meeting with Lawrence Hoffman." Marcus's eyebrows shot up. "Divorce attorney to the Boston elite, specializes in breaking prenups, and charging 7 figures to do so." I handed Marcus a flash drive. "This contains every financial transaction Thomas has made in the past 5 years. Personal accounts, investment portfolio, credit card statements. You'll find some interesting transfers to offshore accounts beginning approximately 18 months ago. When you promoted him to COO of the foundation," Marcus noted, "a position he was thoroughly unqualified for, but he was becoming restless as a trophy husband. I thought giving him something meaningful to do might reignite his dedication. Instead, he used it as an opportunity to siphon funds. Small amounts. Nothing I would notice if I weren't looking specifically for it." I smiled thinly. "Consider, at the cost of a valuable lesson in trust." Marcus set the flash drive aside. "What exactly do you want, Emily?" "Everything I'm entitled to, which is everything I entered the marriage with and everything I've earned since." I met his gaze steadily. "Thomas signed a prenuptial agreement stipulating he would receive a settlement of $2 million in the event of a divorce, provided the dissolution wasn't due to infidelity on his part, which you can now prove it is." Extensively. I reached into my purse and removed a second flash drive. Security footage from my home, emails and text messages, hotel receipts, and testimony from my private investigator, who has been documenting their relationship for the past 3 months. Marcus took the drive, a rare smile crossing his professionally impassive face. "You never do anything by half measures, do you, Emily? I built my company by anticipating problems before they became critical. Why would I handle my marriage any differently?" I stood, smoothing my skirt. "I want him removed from the foundation immediately. Freeze all company-related accounts and revoke his access credentials. Then contact Lawrence Hoffman. To warn him off taking the case? To invite him to lunch," I corrected. "I believe his firm has been looking for new office space. Harlow Properties happens to have an opening in the Beacon Tower." Marcus nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "And Thomas?" "Thomas will receive exactly what he's owed. Nothing more, nothing less." I picked up my purse. "I have a meeting with the board at 11 to explain the situation. I'll expect preliminary divorce papers by the end of the day." "And the house?" "I'm keeping it, of course," I said, slipping on my sunglasses as I moved toward the door. "Though I suspect I'll be renovating the master bedroom. I find I'm no longer comfortable with the current arrangement." When I returned home that evening, the house was silent and dark, showing no signs of Thomas. His Audi was gone from the garage. In its place was a small stack of designer luggage, the Louis Vuitton set I'd given him for our 5th anniversary. In the kitchen, I found a note scrawled on the marble countertop in Thomas's bold handwriting, staying at the Four Seasons until you come to your senses. Call me when you're ready to discuss a reasonable settlement. T.I. crumpled the note and dropped it into the trash, then opened my phone to check the bank alerts I'd set up that morning. As expected, Thomas had attempted to withdraw $50,000 from our joint account, an account I'd emptied and closed before my meeting with Marcus. He'd then tried 3 of his credit cards, all of which had been frozen. The Four Seasons would be calling soon to request an alternative form of payment. I wondered if Thomas's girlfriend would be footing the bill. My phone rang, displaying the foundation's number. I answered with a quiet, "Harlow." "Ms. Harlow, this is security," came the efficient voice of Howard, the head of our building's security team. "Mr. Harlow attempted to enter the executive floor 20 minutes ago. As per your instructions, his credentials have been deactivated. He became insistent. We escorted him from the premises." "I see. Was there a scene?" "Nothing we couldn't handle, ma'am, though he did mention contacting the board directly." "The board has been fully briefed on the situation," I assured Howard. "If Mr. Harlow returns, please notify me immediately, but do not allow him access under any circumstances." "Understood, Ms. Harlow. Will there be anything else?" "No, thank you, Howard. Good night." I ended the call and moved through the darkened house to the kitchen, where I poured myself a glass of the Bordeaux Thomas had always claimed was wasted on my unrefined palate. Upstairs, I could hear the soft, efficient movements of the security Team Marcus had sent to sweep the house for any surveillance equipment Thomas might have installed. They wouldn't find anything. Thomas wasn't thorough enough for such precautions. He'd always been a man who believed in his own innate right to success, viewing the careful groundwork I laid as unnecessary paranoia. This was a man who hadn't even bothered to read the deed to the house he thought he owned. My phone pinged with an email from Eliza Ms. Harlow. "The GPS tracker shows Mr. Harlow has left the Four Seasons and is currently at the Liberty Bar on Newberry Street. His companion matches the description you provided. Our team has a table nearby and will monitor the situation. Diane has completed the security protocol at your residence and reports everything is clear. She recommends changing the security codes immediately. Marcus has sent the preliminary legal documents to your secure email. Is there anything else you require this evening?" "Eliza," I typed a quick response. "Thank you, Eliza. Please have Diane change the security codes and ensure the staff is aware Thomas no longer has house access. Tell our team at the Liberty to maintain distance but document any relevant conversations. That will be all for tonight." I sent the message and took a sip of my wine, wandering to the wall of windows overlooking the garden. In the moonlight, my roses looked silver, ethereal against the dark foliage. Beyond them lay the lights of Boston, twinkling like earthbound stars. Thomas had never appreciated this view. He'd complained about the garden maintenance costs, suggested replacing my carefully cultivated roses with something more practical, as if the joy they brought me wasn't practical enough. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. I checked my security app to see Diane standing on the front porch, her posture professional and alert even at this late hour. I opened the door, greeting her with a nod. "Everything's secure?" "Yes, Ms. Harlow. All codes have been changed, and I've implemented the new security protocol you requested." She handed me a small tablet. "This controls the entire system now. We've removed access from the main panels, so only this device can override the settings. And the surveillance? Active in all areas as specified. Feeds are being monitored remotely by my team and backed up to your secure server." She hesitated, then added, "There's one more thing, Ms. Harlow. Mr. Harlow called the security company directly this afternoon, attempting to change the account authorization. And the company called the verification number on file. My private line," I noted with satisfaction. "Yes, ma'am. He's been flagged in their system as a potential security risk. Any further attempts from him will trigger an immediate alert to both you and my team. Excellent work, Diane. Thank you. After Diane left, I returned to my wine and the moonlit garden view. Thomas was learning his first lesson. Underestimating me had consequences. By morning, he would discover just how thorough those consequences could be. My phone rang again. Thomas. I let it go to voicemail, listening as his message played through the speaker. Emily, this is ridiculous. My keycards don't work, the security codes have been changed, and apparently I'm no longer authorized to access my own office. Whatever. Point you're trying to make. You've made it. Call me back so we can discuss this like adults. Like adults. As if bringing his mistress into our home had been the height of maturity. I deleted the message and opened the secure email from Marcus. The divorce papers were comprehensive, citing Thomas's infidelity and financial impropriety as grounds. His settlement had been reduced from the $2 million specified in our prenup to a mere $100,000, the maximum Marcus thought a judge would allow, given the evidence of Thomas's misconduct. It was a pittance compared to my net worth, but this wasn't. About money. This was about Thomas understanding exactly what he'd thrown away with his betrayal. I signed the documents electronically and replied to Marcus. Approved. Please have these served to Thomas tomorrow at the foundation offices. I believe he'll be there attempting to speak with the board. Also, arrange for a locksmith to change the locks on the house tomorrow morning while I'm at work. I expect Thomas will be trying his key when the security codes fail him. Marcus's response came moments later. Consider it done. The foundation security has been notified to expect him, and the locksmith is scheduled for 9 a.m. Court filings will be submitted first thing in the morning. Get some rest, Emily. Tomorrow will be eventful. I smiled at the understatement. Tomorrow would be the day Thomas Harlow discovered just who he had married, and what it meant to cross her. I took one last look at my silver roses in the moonlight before heading upstairs. In my private office, I checked the security feed from the Liberty Bar one final time. Thomas was there with his blonde, gesturing expansively, clearly deep into his third or fourth drink. The young woman was leaning forward, hanging on his every word, as he no doubt explained away the inconvenient fact of his wife. Let him enjoy his evening. By this time tomorrow, Thomas would understand that his comfortable life had been built on my foundation, and that foundation was about to crumble beneath him. I closed my laptop and prepared for bed, sleeping soundly in the center of the king-sized mattress for the first time in years. Morning arrived with the soft golden light I loved, illuminating my roses as I sipped my coffee and reviewed the overnight security reports. Thomas had returned to the Four Seasons at 1:17 a.m., alone. His credit card had been declined, and he'd been forced to call his girlfriend to provide her card for the room. The hotel had been reluctant, but eventually acquiesced when she arrived in person, looking considerably less enthusiastic than she had earlier in the evening. Lesson 2 for Thomas. Charm only gets you so far without financial backing. I dressed carefully in a Chanel suit the color of dark sapphires, pearls at my throat and ears, hair swept into a perfect chignon. Battle armor, my mother would have called it. She'd taught me early that presentation was half the victory. Always look successful, Emily, she'd said, stretching her nurse's salary to afford a single good suit for job interviews. People believe what they see more than what they hear. The locksmith arrived precisely at 9 a.m. as I was leaving for the Kauai office. I provided brief instructions and my private number for when the work was complete, then slid into the back of the waiting town car. The foundation offices, please, James, I told my driver. I believe we have a bit of a situation to address this morning. Yes, Ms. Harlow, James replied, pulling smoothly away from the curb. Traffic is light this morning. We should arrive by 9:30. Perfect timing, I murmured, opening my tablet to review the morning's financial reports. Harlow Technologies stock was up 2 points in pre-market trading. Our acquisition of the small tech firm had been well received by investors. Thomas's name wasn't on a single document related to the company. He'd never shown interest in the technical aspects of what we did, preferring to focus on the social benefits of being married to a successful CEO. The parties, the connections, the lifestyle. He'd been content to run the charitable foundation, making splashy donations and accepting accolades for philanthropy funded entirely by my company's profits. The car pulled up to the gleaming glass tower housing the Harlow Foundation. As expected, Thomas's Audi was parked haphazardly near the entrance, one wheel up on the curb in his haste. "Wait for me, please, James," I instructed, gathering my purse and tablet. "This shouldn't take long." The security team nodded respectfully as I entered the lobby, one of them stepping forward immediately. "Ms. Harlow, Mr. Harlow is currently in the main conference room with the Foundation Board. He arrived approximately 20 minutes ago." "Thank you, Michael. Please have someone move his car to the visitor's lot. He's parked illegally." "Right away, Ms. Harlow." I took the private elevator to the Foundation's floor, using my handprint to authorize access. When the doors opened, I could hear Thomas's raised voice coming from the conference room. "Absolutely ridiculous. I've been running this foundation for 2 years. She can't just lock me out without cause." I paused outside the door, listening. "Mr. Harlow," came the calm voice of Janet Pierce, the Foundation's board chair and a woman I'd known for 15 years. "The board has reviewed the evidence presented by Ms. Harlow's legal team. The financial irregularities alone are grounds for immediate termination, regardless of your personal relationship with Ms. Harlow." "What financial irregularities? Those were approved expenditures." "Approved by whom?" Janet asked coolly. "Because we've reviewed the Foundation's financial protocols and all expenditures over $10,000 require dual authorization. The transfers to the Cayman account had only your signature. I chose that moment to enter, the room falling silent as all eyes turned toward me. Thomas stood at the head of the conference table, hair disheveled, still wearing last night's rumpled suit. He looked like he hadn't slept. "Emily," he said, a flash of relief crossing his face before it hardened again. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" "Good morning, Thomas." I nodded to the board members. "Janet, everyone, thank you for coming in early. I apologize for the disruption to your schedules." "Not at all, Emily," Janet replied, professional as always. "We were just discussing the Foundation's leadership transition." "Leadership transition?" Thomas sputtered. "This is my foundation." "The Harlow Foundation," I corrected quietly, "is a registered 501c3 non-profit organization established by Harlow Technologies. Your position as director was always contingent on both performance and ethical conduct." "You can't fire me. I'm your husband." "Soon-to-be ex-husband," I noted, placing my tablet on the conference table. "And yes, the board can absolutely terminate your employment. In fact, they must, given the evidence of fund misappropriation." Thomas's face flushed dark red. "Those were legitimate business expenses." "A wire transfer of $175,000 to a private account in the Cayman Islands is not a legitimate business expense, Thomas. Neither are the cash withdrawals totaling nearly $50,000 over the past 6 months, or the consulting fees paid to Reed Paralegal Services." His expression froze. Janet and the other board members looked away uncomfortably. "You've been spying on me," he accused, voice low and dangerous. "I've been doing my fiduciary duty as CEO of the company that funds this foundation," I corrected. "Now, I believe our legal team is waiting outside with some paperwork for you. After that, security will escort you from the building." "This isn't over, Emily," Thomas warned, desperation creeping into his voice. "You think you can just throw me away after 8 years of marriage? I built a life with you. I gave up my own career to support yours." "Did you? How fascinating." I turned to Janet. "I believe we're finished here. The emergency board session can commence without Mr. Harlow present." Janet nodded, relief evident in her expression. "Yes, I think that would be best." 2 security officers appeared in the doorway, along with a courier holding an envelope that I knew contained the divorce papers. "Mr. Harlow," one of the officers said firmly, "please come with us." For a moment, I thought Thomas might refuse, might make a scene that would require physical removal, but self-preservation had always been his strongest instinct. He straightened. His tie gathered what remained of his dignity and walked stiffly toward the door. "You'll regret this," he said as he passed me. "When my lawyer finishes with you, you'll wish you'd been more reasonable." I met his gaze calmly. "Your lawyer declined to take the case this morning, Thomas. Something about a conflict of interest. With his firm's new landlord. I believe Lawrence Hoffman recommended a colleague in Providence who might be willing to speak with you, if you can afford his retainer." The blood drained from Thomas's face as the full implication of my words sank. He'd been outmaneuvered at every turn. "The courier has some documents for you to review," I added softly. "I suggest reading them thoroughly this time. Details matter, Thomas. They always have." I turned away, effectively dismissing him, and took my seat at the conference table. Behind me, I heard Thomas accept the envelope with numb fingers, then the sound of the security team leading him away. "Now then," I addressed the waiting board members, "let's discuss the Foundation's new direction. Shall we?" As the meeting proceeded, my phone vibrated with a message from the locksmith confirming the house locks had been changed. Another message from Marcus indicated the divorce filing had been submitted to the court and would be public record by noon. Outside, I knew Thomas would be sitting in his illegally parked car. Correction, in his car now parked in the visitor's lot, reading through divorce papers that offered him a fraction of what he'd expected. He would be realizing, perhaps for the first time, that his comfortable life had been built entirely on my generosity. Generosity that had now run out. And somewhere across town, a young blonde paralegal would soon discover that her dream of moving into a Victorian mansion with her married boyfriend had just evaporated like morning dew under the harsh light of reality. The thought brought the smallest of smiles to my lips as I continued outlining the Foundation's restructuring plan. To the attentive board. This was just the beginning of Thomas's education, and I intended to be a very thorough teacher. The first text arrived at 2:17 p.m., just as I was finishing a conference call with our Tokyo office. "Emily, my card was declined at lunch. What have you done?" I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the message to Marcus with a brief note. It begins. The Foundation Board meeting had concluded with unanimous approval of the restructuring plan. Patricia Chen, my CFO at Harlow Technologies and longtime trusted ally, would step in as interim director while we conducted a proper search for Thomas's replacement. The financial audit would begin immediately, tracing every dollar Thomas had touched during his tenure. My phone buzzed repeatedly throughout the afternoon. Thomas's messages evolved from irritated to desperate to threatening as he discovered one by one the safeguards I'd put in place years ago. "The bank says I don't have access to our accounts. Fix this now. My key doesn't work at the house. I'm coming to the office." "You changed the alarm code too?" "Real mature, Emily. I just spoke with the board. How dare you accuse me of embezzlement? You'll regret this." "I've called Lawrence." That last one made me smile. Lawrence Hoffman had already called Marcus to express his regrets about being unable to take Thomas's case due to a significant conflict of interest. Apparently, Harlow Properties was offering his firm a very attractive lease in the prestigious Beacon Tower, considerably below market rate. "Ms. Harlow," Eliza's voice came through my intercom. "Mr. Harlow is in the lobby again. Security has denied him access to the executive floor." "Thank you, Eliza. Has he been served with the court papers yet?" "Yes, ma'am. The process server confirmed delivery 30 minutes ago." "Excellent. Please inform security that Mr. Harlow is not to be admitted under any circumstances. If he refuses to leave, they should contact the police." Understood. I returned to reviewing acquisition proposals, pushing thoughts of Thomas aside. He was Now officially a distraction, and I had never tolerated distractions in my business life. Why should my personal life be any different? At 4:45 p.m., Eliza knocked softly on my office door. "Ms. Harlow, there's a situation downstairs. Mr. Harlow is causing a scene in the lobby. He's demanding to see you and refusing to leave." I sighed, closing the folder I'd been reviewing. "Has security called the police?" "They're on their way. Mr. Harlow appears to be intoxicated." Of course he was. Thomas had always turned to alcohol when things didn't go his way. A weakness I'd noted early in our marriage but had chosen to overlook. Another mistake on my part. "Record everything," I instructed, standing and smoothing my skirt. "I'll handle this personally." The executive elevator opened directly into the lobby, providing me with a perfect view of the situation. Thomas stood near the security desk, tie askew, hair disheveled, waving what I assumed were the divorce papers at the impassive security officers. "Don't understand. I'm Thomas Harlow. My wife is the CEO," he was shouting, his words slightly slurred. "This is ridiculous. You can't keep me out of my own company." "It was never your company, Thomas," I said quietly, stepping off the elevator. He whirled around, nearly losing his balance. "Emily, tell these goons who I am." "They know exactly who you are," I replied, keeping my voice level. My employees were watching this display with barely concealed fascination. Tomorrow there would be gossip, but I would address that with a company-wide email. Transparency was always the best policy when dealing with potential distractions. "And they're following my explicit instructions not to admit you to the building." "This is insane!" Thomas thrust the divorce papers toward me. $100,000? After 8 years of marriage? My lawyer says I'm entitled to half of everything. "Your lawyer," I reminded him, "declined your case this morning. And any lawyer who promises you half of my assets clearly hasn't read our prenuptial agreement." I glanced at the security team. "Has someone called the police?" "They're on their way, Ms. Harlow," confirmed the head of security, a former military man who'd been with the company for a decade. "You'd have me arrested?" Thomas looked genuinely shocked. "Your own husband?" "I'd have a trespasser removed from private property after he's been asked repeatedly to leave," I corrected. "The fact that we're still legally married for the moment is irrelevant." "This isn't over, Emily," he hissed, stepping closer. I could smell the whiskey on his breath. "You think you've thought of everything, but you haven't. I know things about you, about the company, things that would interest the SEC." I raised an eyebrow. "Are you attempting to blackmail me, Thomas, in front of witnesses? That's rather clumsy, even for you." His face contorted, and for a moment I thought he might actually try to grab me. The security team must have thought the same, because they moved forward as one. "Mr. Harlow," the head of security said firmly, "you need to leave now." Thomas looked from me to the security team, then to the small crowd of employees who had gathered to watch the spectacle. Whatever he saw in their faces, curiosity, pity, discomfort, seemed to finally penetrate his alcohol-fogged brain. He straightened, attempting to gather his dignity. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer," he said stiffly, turning toward the exit. "I look forward to it," I replied, "though you might want to find one who specializes in criminal defense, given the nature of the Foundation's financial audit." He froze mid-step, then continued walking without looking back. The glass doors slid closed behind him just as 2 police cruisers pulled up outside. I turned to address the watching employees. "I apologize for the disruption. As you may have gathered, Mr. Harlow and I are separating. This is a personal matter and will not affect company operations. I would appreciate your discretion regarding today's events." With that, I returned to the elevator, maintaining my composure until the doors closed. Only then did I allow myself a moment of pure exhaustion, leaning against the wall and closing my eyes briefly. Thomas's threat about the SEC was empty. I ran a clean company, and every transaction was meticulously documented and reviewed by multiple levels of oversight. But his willingness to make such a threat publicly demonstrated a level of desperation I hadn't anticipated quite so soon, which meant he'd likely try something more drastic next. When I reached my office, Eliza was waiting with a cup of tea and an update. The police are speaking with security now. They've advised Mr. Harlow not to return to the property. His blood alcohol level was just below the legal limit for driving, so they've allowed him to leave in his car, but have notified patrol units in the area to be on alert. Thank you, Eliza. Has Marcus been updated? Yes, ma'am. He suggests having a restraining order prepared as a precaution, given Mr. Harlow's behavior. I considered this, taking a sip of the perfectly prepared Earl Grey. Not yet. A restraining order would be public record and could generate press attention we don't need. Right now, the Baldwin acquisition is too delicate to risk any negative publicity. Understood. Will you be going home? Or would you like a car to take you elsewhere this evening? Home. The word felt strange suddenly. For years, the Victorian on Beacon, Hill had been merely a showcase, a perfect setting for entertaining Thomas's friends and business associates. I'd spent more time in my office or traveling than I had in those beautifully appointed rooms. Home, I decided. But have security perform a sweep first, and I'd like Diana to stay overnight if she's available. I'll arrange it immediately, the I. House was silent when I arrived, the new locks gleaming in the early evening light. Diana met me at the door, her posture alert and professional as always. The house is secure, Ms. Harlow. We've completed a full sweep and all systems are functioning normally. Thank you, Diana. Any sign of Thomas? He drove by twice but didn't attempt to approach. He appeared to be on the phone both times. I nodded, unsurprised. Thomas would be calling everyone he knew, looking for allies, legal advice, or simply a sympathetic ear. He'd always been skilled at presenting himself as the reasonable party in any disagreement. I've prepared the guest bedroom on the 3rd floor for myself, Diana continued. I'll maintain a security presence overnight without being intrusive. I appreciate it, Diana. I'll be in my office if you need me. I climbed the stairs to my private sanctuary, kicking off my heels and unbuttoning my blazer as I went. The events of the day had left me drained but clear-headed. Thomas had shown his hand, the public scene, the vague threats, the drinking. All predictable responses from a man who suddenly found himself powerless. My phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. This is Melissa. We need to talk about Thomas. Ah, the girlfriend. I considered ignoring it, then curiosity got the better of me. I typed a brief response. This is Emily Harlow. What exactly do we need to discuss? The reply came almost immediately. He told me you were separated, that you'd agreed to divorce months ago. I never would have gotten involved otherwise, a likely story. I'd seen the security footage, heard her eager questions about moving into his house. But there was something in the tone of her message, a desperation that felt genuine. Thomas has a habit of rewriting reality to suit his needs, I replied. If you believed him, that was your first mistake. He's at my apartment now. He's been drinking and saying things that don't make sense. About you controlling everything, freezing him out. I smiled thinly at that. Not everything. Just what's mine. There was a longer pause before her next message. He says you're trying to frame him for embezzlement. That you planted evidence. So that was his play. The victim narrative, complete with fabricated conspiracy. I should have expected it. The Foundation's financial records speak for themselves, I responded. As do the transfers to your employer, Reed Paralegal Services listed as consulting fees. Interesting coincidence, don't you think? Another long pause. I didn't know about any of that. I swear. Perhaps she hadn't. Thomas was adept at compartmentalizing his life, showing different faces to different people. I had no doubt he'd presented himself to Melissa as a successful, generous man with a conveniently absent wife. Then you might want to reconsider your association with him, I advised. Things are about to get considerably more difficult for Thomas. He said you're going to destroy him, that you have the power to make sure he never works in Boston again. I considered my response carefully. Whatever I wrote might eventually be shown to Thomas, or possibly a lawyer. I don't need to destroy Thomas, I finally replied. He's doing an admirable job of that himself. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to attend to. I blocked the number and set my phone aside, turning to my computer. A quick check of the security cameras showed no sign of Thomas's Audi on the street. He was presumably still at Melissa's apartment, plotting his next move. My email inbox contained a message from Marcus with the subject line, Financial Discovery. I opened it to find a detailed report of Thomas's spending over the past year. Damning chronicle of extravagance and deception, weekend trips I'd known nothing about, jewelry purchases from Tiffany that had never made their way to my jewelry box, restaurant charges at intimate bistros I'd never visited. The evidence of his affair was painfully thorough. More concerning were the cash withdrawals, large sums taken out regularly and untraceable after they left our joint account. The Foundation's audit would likely reveal similar patterns. I forwarded the report to our financial team with instructions to trace every transaction, then turned my attention to the Baldwin acquisition documents. Work had always been my refuge, the one constant in a life where personal relationships proved disappointingly unreliable. Hours later, a soft knock at my door pulled me from a detailed analysis of Baldwin's patent portfolio. Ms. Harlow? Diana's voice was professionally calm, but with an undercurrent of tension that immediately put me on alert. Mr. Harlow has returned. He's at the front gate, demanding entry. He appears to be highly intoxicated. I glanced at the clock, nearly midnight. Is he alone? Yes, ma'am. He arrived in a taxi. The driver has left. I pulled up the security feed on my computer. Thomas stood swaying at the wrought iron gate, jabbing repeatedly at the intercom button. His tie was gone, his expensive shirt stained and rumpled. Has he made any threats? I asked, watching as he began shouting inaudibly at the security camera. Not specifically, but his demeanor is aggressive. I've notified the police as a precaution. I nodded, still watching the screen. Thomas had moved from shouting to pleading, his body language shifting from angry to defeated as he spoke to the unanswering camera. Something twisted in my chest. Not sympathy, exactly, but a hollow recognition of what we'd become. 8 years of marriage reduced to a drunk man at a locked gate and a woman watching him on a security monitor. Let's wait for the police, I decided. I don't want to escalate the situation by speaking with him in this state. Diana nodded and withdrew, leaving me to watch as Thomas eventually sat on the curb, head in his hands. 10 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up beside him. The officers spoke with him briefly, then helped him into the back seat. Not arrested, they weren't handcuffing him, but being removed from the premises. I closed the laptop, suddenly, exhausted. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new attempts by Thomas to regain control of a situation that had spiraled far beyond his grasp. I needed to be rested and clear-headed to face them. As I prepared for bed, my phone chimed with an email alert from our security monitoring service. Thomas had been dropped off at the Four Seasons by the police. The hotel had allowed him entry despite his previous payment issues, suggesting he'd found another source of funds. Interesting. Thomas's personal accounts should have been nearly empty by now, given his spending habits and the fact that I'd cut off his access to our joint resources. The Foundation paid him well, but not well enough to afford multiple nights at the Four Seasons after all his other expenses. I sent a quick message to Marcus. Thomas is staying at the Four Seasons again. Find out how he's paying for it. Then I turned off my phone and slipped between the sheets of my king-sized bed, falling into a dreamless sleep. Morning brought clarity, as it always did. Over coffee in my sunlit kitchen, I reviewed the overnight security reports while the news played softly in the background. Thomas had remained at the hotel, ordering room service and making numerous phone calls until nearly 3 a.m. Our monitoring team had been unable to determine who he was calling, but the pattern suggested desperation. Short calls to multiple numbers, likely being sent to voicemail given the hour. My phone rang. Marcus. "Good morning," I answered, setting aside my tablet. "You're calling early." "I thought you'd want to know immediately," Marcus replied, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Thomas has been busy overnight. He's contacted 3 journalists with insider information about Harlow Technologies. Specifically, he's alleging financial improprieties related to the Chinese expansion." A cold knot formed in my stomach. The Chinese expansion had been completely legitimate, but it had involved complex financial arrangements that could look suspicious to an outside observer without context. What exactly is he claiming? That the company falsified reports to Chinese regulators and bribed officials to expedite permits. He's offering documentation to support his claims. Documentation he stole from my home office, I surmised, mentally cataloging what Thomas might have accessed. I'd always been careful to keep truly sensitive materials secured, but I'd grown complacent over the years, assuming Thomas's disinterest in my business was genuine. "Likely," Marcus agreed. 2 of the journalists ignored him. They know a disgruntled spouse when they see one, but Garrett Wilson from the Financial Times seems interested. He's been looking for an angle on Harlow Technologies for years. Garrett Wilson, a business reporter known for his aggressive investigations and tendency to publish first, verify later. Of course Thomas would target him. "Have Diane do a full sweep of my home office and the Foundation headquarters," I instructed. "Any missing files, any accessed computers, anything that seems out of place. And get me everything we have on Wilson. Professional history, personal background, known associates." "Already in progress," Marcus assured me. "One more thing. We've traced the source of Thomas's newfound funds. He's borrowed $50,000 from James Worthington." I raised an eyebrow at that. James Worthington was Thomas's closest friend, a hedge fund manager with a reputation for cutting corners and a long-standing grudge against me for declining his firm's investment services. "Unsurprising," I noted. "Worthington has been trying to get access to Harlow Technologies for years. He probably sees this as his opportunity." "There's more," Marcus continued. "Worthington has been making calls to several board members, suggesting an emergency meeting to discuss leadership concerns in light of your personal situation. A bold move, but ultimately futile. The board had stood with me through far more serious challenges than a messy divorce." "The board won't bite," I said confidently. "But have Eliza schedule calls with each member today anyway. I want to get ahead of any narratives Thomas and Worthington might be spinning. Already on her calendar. Now, about the Wilson situation. How do you want to handle it?" I considered my options. A preemptive statement would only lend credibility to Thomas's accusations. Legal threats would make us look defensive. Ignoring it entirely risked allowing a damaging story to gain traction. Set up a meeting with Wilson, I decided. Just me, no PR team. Position it as a general overview of our international operations, with specific emphasis on regulatory compliance. Make it clear this isn't an interview about Thomas's allegations. It's a background briefing on how global technology firms navigate complex regulatory environments. "He won't agree to those terms," Marcus warned. "He will if we offer him exclusive access to our upcoming quantum computing announcement. The embargo lifts next week, but he can have the story 3 days early if he meets with me today." Marcus chuckled appreciatively. "Clever. The quantum project is the biggest tech story of the quarter. He won't be able to resist." "Exactly. And once he's seen our actual documentation on the Chinese expansion, he'll realize Thomas's evidence is either fabricated or taken completely out of context." I'll set it up immediately. What about Thomas himself? I sipped my coffee, watching. A cardinal land on the rose trellis outside my window. Thomas is getting desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. Let's give him enough rope to hang himself professionally, then offer him a dignified exit. A dignified exit? Marcus sounded surprised. After everything he's done? The Foundation's work is too important to be tainted by scandal, I explained. And Harlow Technologies doesn't need the distraction of a public legal battle. Once Thomas realizes his accusations have fallen flat, and his financial options have run out, we'll offer him a revised settlement, still far less than the prenup specified, but enough to disappear quietly. And if he refuses? Then we release everything. The Foundation audit, the evidence of his affair, the documentation of his attempts to damage the company out of spite. His reputation won't survive it. Marcus was silent for a moment. You've always been 10 steps ahead, Emily. It's why I've enjoyed working with you all these years. Not always, I corrected, thinking of the blind spots that had allowed Thomas to deceive me for so long. But I'm learning. After ending the call, I finished my coffee and headed upstairs to dress for the day. My closet, half empty now that Diana had removed Thomas's things to storage as instructed, felt strangely peaceful. I selected a steel gray Armani suit that had always signaled business rather than diplomacy to those who knew me well. Today would be about containment and counterattack. Thomas had escalated from personal betrayal to corporate sabotage, and while I had anticipated the possibility, the reality required swift, decisive action. As I fastened my grandmother's pearls around my neck, a reminder of the long line of resilient women I came from, my phone chimed with a text from Eliza. Mr. Wilson has agreed to a meeting at 11 a.m. with the terms you specified. Car will pick you up at 10:30, perfect timing. I would have just enough time to brief the crisis management team and review the Chinese expansion documentation before facing the journalist who thought he was about to break a career-making scandal. Little did Wilson know he was walking into a narrative already carefully orchestrated. One where Thomas Harlow would soon discover the true cost of underestimating his wife. Garrett Wilson was exactly as I expected. Rumpled tweed jacket, premature silver at his temples, and the calculating gaze of a man who'd built his reputation on corporate exposés. He sat across from me in the private dining room at Mirabelle, toying with his water glass and trying not to look too eager. Ms. Harlow, he began, once pleasantries had been exchanged. I appreciate you making time on such short notice. Mr. Wilson, I responded, my tone cordial but measured. I understand you're working on a story about international regulatory compliance in the tech sector. It's a complex subject, and one I'm happy to provide context for. His eyebrow twitched. Slightly, the tell of a man who knew his cover story wasn't being accepted at face value. Yes. Well, specifically, I'm interested in Harlow Technologies' expansion into the Chinese market. He removed a small recorder from his pocket. Do you mind if I record our conversation? For accuracy, I smiled. Not at all. In fact, I gestured to Eliza, who had been waiting discreetly by the door. She approached with a sleek leather portfolio. I've taken the liberty of bringing our complete regulatory filings for the Chinese expansion, along with correspondence, from officials, inspection reports, and third-party compliance certifications. Wilson's eyes widened slightly as Eliza placed the thick portfolio before him. That's quite thorough. Harlow Technologies values transparency, Mr. Wilson, particularly when it comes to our international operations. I opened the portfolio, turning it toward him. You'll find every document properly dated, notarized, and authenticated. Our legal team has provided a summary on page 1, but feel free to examine whatever interests you. He flipped through the first few pages, his practiced skepticism gradually giving way to confusion. These weren't the documents he'd been expecting, not the smoking gun Thomas had promised. I understand, I continued smoothly. that you may have received information suggesting improprieties in our Chinese regulatory process. Perhaps allegations of falsified documentation or bribery? Wilson's head snapped up, his expression confirming my suspicion. I don't reveal my sources, Ms. Harlow. Of course not. Nor would I ask you to. I leaned forward slightly. But I would point out that sometimes sources have motivations beyond the public interest, especially sources who are in the midst of contentious divorce proceedings. A muscle twitched in Wilson's jaw. This isn't about your personal life, isn't it? I countered gently. You received documents from my husband, Thomas Harlow, alleging corporate misconduct. Documents he obtained from my home office without authorization after learning I had filed for divorce citing his infidelity and financial impropriety. Wilson remained silent, neither confirming nor denying, but his discomfort was palpable. What Thomas provided you, I continued, were preliminary drafts of regulatory filings, documents my team created while exploring various compliance strategies. What you're looking at now are the final official filings that were actually submitted, along with the government responses confirming their acceptance. He glanced down at the portfolio again, then back at me. If there's nothing improper in your Chinese dealings, why meet with me at all? Why not just ignore the allegations? I smiled. Because good journalism deserves good sources, Mr. Wilson. And because I'm offering you something much more valuable than a scandal based on stolen draft documents. His eyebrow raised. The quantum computing announcement. 3 days before anyone else, I confirmed. Exclusive access to our lab, interviews with the lead researchers, and the first public demonstration of the prototype. Wilson sat back, clearly weighing his options. A salacious divorce-adjacent corporate scandal might generate clicks, but an exclusive on what could be the decade's biggest technological breakthrough would cement his reputation as a serious journalist. What's the catch? No catch. Simply a request for thorough reporting. I signaled to the waiter, who approached with our lunch order. Check every document in that portfolio. Verify every signature. Call the regulators directly if you wish. I'm confident you'll find that Thomas's allegations don't hold up to scrutiny. And what if I find something that contradicts your narrative? Then report it, I said simply. I've built Harlow Technologies on integrity, Mr. Wilson. I won't compromise. That for anyone, not even to avoid personal embarrassment. We spent the remainder of lunch discussing the technical aspects of quantum computing, with Wilson taking careful notes. By the time dessert arrived, the portfolio sat closed at his elbow, and his earlier suspicion had been replaced by professional respect. Whether Thomas's attempt at sabotage had been neutralized completely remained to be seen, but I'd given Wilson a compelling reason to fact-check thoroughly before publishing anything damaging. As we parted ways in front of the restaurant, Wilson hesitated, then asked, "Off the record, how did you know what documents your husband provided?" Me? I smiled. I didn't. But Thomas only had access to preliminary drafts from my home office. The final documents never left the secure corporate server. Wilson shook his head, a reluctant smile crossing his face. He really didn't know who he was dealing with, did he? Few people do, Mr. Wilson. I extended my hand. I look forward to reading your piece on our quantum initiative next week. The Foundation audit results arrived in my email just as I was entering a board meeting that afternoon. I skimmed the executive summary quickly, my expression remaining neutral despite the damning findings. Thomas had been more thorough in his deception than I'd anticipated. Beyond the transfers to the Cayman account we'd already identified, the audit had uncovered a pattern of falsified expense reports, phantom vendors, and inflated program costs. In total, nearly $1.2 million had been diverted over the past 2 years. Emily. Janet Pierce, the board chair, was watching me expectantly. Is everything all right? We'll need to add an item to today's agenda, I replied, forwarding the audit report to each board member. The Foundation audit has been completed, and the findings are significant. A series of notification chimes echoed around the conference table as the report arrived on multiple devices simultaneously. Silence fell as the board members began reading, expressions shifting from curiosity to shock to anger. "This is," one member began, then stopped, shaking his head. "Criminal," Janet finished flatly. "These aren't accounting errors or judgment calls. This is systematic theft." I nodded. "The audit team has already reported their findings to the appropriate authorities. The FBI has jurisdiction due to the interstate and international nature of the transfers." "Will this be made public?" asked Robert Chen, our chief legal counsel. "Eventually, yes. The Foundation's status as a 501c3 requires transparency with regulatory bodies." I met each board member's gaze in turn. "We have two options. We can lead with this story, announcing the discovery, Thomas's termination, and our full cooperation with authorities, or we can wait until the investigation becomes public through other channels." "If we lead," Janet noted, "we control the narrative." "But we also bring immediate attention to the situation," Robert countered. "Attention that could affect donor confidence and distract from the Foundation's work." The room fell silent as the board considered the dilemma. My phone vibrated with an incoming text from Marcus. FBI agents just arrived at the Four Seasons to interview Thomas. So the wheels of justice were already turning. I had expected the investigation to move quickly given the clarity of the evidence, but not quite this quickly. Someone at the Foundation must have made the report before copying me on the findings. "We lead," I decided, breaking the silence. "We announced tomorrow morning that an internal audit discovered financial irregularities, that we've reported those findings to authorities, and that we're cooperating fully with the investigation. We don't name Thomas explicitly, but we reference the immediate termination of the individual responsible." "That still leaves us vulnerable to fallout," Robert warned. "Less vulnerable than if we appear to be hiding something," I countered. "Donors respect proactive transparency. They understand that organizations can be victimized by individuals. What they don't forgive is the appearance of a cover-up." The board discussed the strategy for another 20 minutes before voting unanimously to approve my recommendation. As the meeting continued on to other business, I discreetly checked my phone for updates. Marcus had sent 2 more messages. Thomas refused to speak with agents without a lawyer present. He's frantically calling everyone in his contact list, and then Worthington has stopped taking his calls. Word of the FBI involvement has spread quickly, so James Worthington, Thomas's supposed ally, had abandoned him at the first sign of serious legal trouble. Unsurprising, men like Worthington valued loyalty only when it cost them nothing. By the time the board meeting concluded, my security team had reported Thomas checking out of the Four Seasons in obvious distress, a hastily packed suitcase in tow. His destination was unknown, but I had a suspicion he would eventually make his way back to the house, back to the life he was watching disintegrate before his eyes. I instructed Diana to increase security at the house for the evening, then focused on the PR strategy for tomorrow's announcement. The Foundation's reputation had to be protected, regardless of the personal complications. True to pattern, Thomas arrived at the gate just after 8 p.m., this time sober and alone. The security camera showed him standing with his suitcase, speaking calmly into the intercom. "Emily, I know you're listening. We need to talk. This has gone far enough." I watched from my study, considering my options. Thomas was not currently a threat. He appeared composed, even resigned. And there were matters that needed to be addressed face to face. "Let him in," I instructed Diana, who had been monitoring the situation from the security room. "But stay within earshot." Thomas entered cautiously, leaving his suitcase in the foyer as if uncertain of his welcome. He looked haggard, the polished corporate facade cracked beyond repair. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his normally perfect hair unstyled. I met him in the living room, standing rather than offering him a seat. "You've had a busy day." He flinched, then nodded wearily. "The FBI showed up at my hotel." "Yes, I heard." I folded my arms. "The foundation audit was quite thorough, Thomas. $1.2 million is a significant amount to misappropriate." "I can explain." "I'm sure you can. To your lawyer, to the FBI, perhaps eventually to a judge." I cut him off with a wave of my hand. "That's not why I allowed you in tonight." He swallowed, some of his desperate confidence returning. "You're reconsidering the divorce?" The question was so absurd I almost laughed. "No, Thomas. I'm offering you one final chance to salvage some small measure of dignity from this situation." "What does that mean?" "It means that tomorrow morning, the Foundation will be announcing the discovery of financial irregularities and its full cooperation with federal authorities. Your name won't be mentioned in the initial statement, but it won't take long for journalists to connect the dots." Thomas paled. "You can't do that. It will destroy me professionally." "It's already done. The board voted unanimously this afternoon." I moved to the sideboard and poured myself a small measure of scotch, Thomas's favorite, which he'd taught me to appreciate despite my initial dislike. "However, there is an alternative path forward." Hope flickered in his eyes. "What kind of alternative?" "You signed the divorce papers tonight, accepting the revised settlement of $100,000. You provide a full accounting of all misappropriated funds and agree to make restitution to the Foundation over time. You submit your resignation from the Foundation effective 2 weeks ago, citing personal reasons. And in return? In return, the Foundation doesn't press charges. The FBI investigation will continue. That's beyond my control. But without the Foundation's cooperation, they'll have a much harder case to make." I took a small sip of the scotch, feeling its warmth spread through my chest. "You'll still have to answer for the tax implications of those offshore transfers. But that's between you and the IRS." Thomas stared at me, disbelief warring with desperate hope on his face. "Why would you offer me this? After everything?" I set down my glass. "Because 8 years of marriage deserves at least the dignity of a clean ending. Because a public trial would distract from the Foundation's important work. And because, frankly, I have more important matters to focus on than overseeing your destruction." He looked away, digestion my words. "Wilson didn't believe me. About China." "No, he didn't. Your stolen draft documents weren't particularly compelling against the complete official record." Thomas laughed humorlessly. "You're always 10 steps ahead, aren't you?" "Not always," I admitted. "I didn't see this coming, Thomas. Not the affair, not the embezzlement, not the betrayal. Those were blind spots I won't allow again." Something like genuine regret crossed his face. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. Melissa was just... She admired me, looked up to me, made me feel important." "And the money? Was that about feeling important too?" He shrugged helplessly. "It started small. Expenses I thought I deserved for all the work I was doing. Then Melissa wanted more. Trips, jewelry, promises about our future. The Foundation paid me well, but not well enough for the lifestyle she expected." "The lifestyle you promised her," I corrected. "In a house you didn't own, with money you didn't have." Thomas flinched, but didn't deny it. "I'll sign the papers. What choice do I have?" "Very little at this point." I moved to my desk and retrieved the divorce agreement Marcus had updated that afternoon. "The settlement has been deposited in an escrow account. It will be released to you upon final approval of the divorce." $100,000 won't last long," he noted, accepting the papers with resignation. "No, it won't. But it's $100,000 more than you're legally entitled to given the circumstances." I handed him a pen. "Your signature on all flagged pages, please." As Thomas signed page after page, I watched the man I had once trusted enough to marry transform before my eyes. The confident, charming executive was gone, replaced by a hollow shell of entitlement and regret. Had he always been this way, or had our marriage somehow shaped him into this person? "What about Melissa?" I asked suddenly, surprising myself with the question. Thomas looked up, confusion crossing his face. "What about her?" "Does she know about the FBI? About the audit findings?" He shook his head. "We haven't spoken since yesterday. She wasn't happy about having to pay for my hotel room." Of course she wasn't. The fantasy of being with a wealthy, powerful man had collided rather abruptly with the reality of a desperate, potentially criminal ex-executive. "Where will you go after this?" I asked, accepting the signed papers and verifying each signature. "I have a cousin in Chicago," Thomas said vaguely. "He's offered me his guest room until I figure things out." Chicago. As far from Boston, and the scandal about to break, as he could reasonably manage. "The FBI will still want to interview you," I reminded him, gathering the papers into a folder. "Running won't help your case." "I'm not running," he insisted, though we both knew it was a lie. "I just need some time to regroup, figure out my next steps." I nodded, not bothering to point out that his next steps would be largely determined by federal prosecutors rather than his own ambitions. "Diana will show you out. Your personal belongings have been packed and placed in storage. The facility information is in this envelope." I handed him a sealed envelope from my desk drawer. "The first 6 months of storage have been paid." Thomas accepted the envelope, a flash of his old confidence returning. "You really did plan for everything." "I learned from my mistakes," I replied simply. "Good night, Thomas." As Diana escorted him to the door, I sent a quick text to Marcus confirming that Thomas had signed the revised agreement. The divorce would be finalized quickly now, a small mercy in a situation that had grown increasingly complex. Through the security feed, I watched Thomas hesitate at the gate, looking back at the house one last time before walking away. Suitcase in hand. The Audi was conspicuously absent, likely repossessed when his financial house of cards began collapsing. My phone rang, Janet Pierce calling to confirm tomorrow's announcement strategy. I pushed thoughts of Thomas aside and refocused on the task at hand, protecting the foundation, reassuring donors, and ensuring the important work continued uninterrupted. Personal entanglements could no longer be allowed to distract from what truly mattered. The foundation's announcement went live at 9 a.m. the next morning, generating precisely the measured response I'd anticipated. Financial publications picked up the story immediately, noting the proactive transparency and the foundation's commitment to accountability. By midday, Thomas's name had indeed surfaced in connection with the investigation, but our careful framing had established the narrative, the foundation as victim rather than accomplice. Garrett Wilson published a brief piece in the Financial Times online edition, praising the foundation's handling of the situation while noting that sources close to the investigation identified the former director as Thomas Harlow, husband of Harlow Technologies CEO Emily Harlow. The article mentioned their pending divorce but focused primarily on the foundation's work and its plans moving forward. True to his word, Wilson had verified the documents I'd provided rather than running with Thomas's allegations. The article even included a quote from a Chinese regulatory official confirming Harlow Technologies' full compliance with all requirements. By afternoon, I'd received calls from 3 board members and 6 major donors, all expressing support for my leadership during this challenging time. The crisis, while not fully resolved, was being managed effectively. Then Eliza appeared in my office doorway, her normally composed expression troubled. "Ms. Harlow, there's something you should see." She handed me her tablet, open to a gossip blog I'd never heard of. The headline made my stomach clench. Tech CEO's husband tells all. Inside my marriage to Boston's Ice Queen. The article featured several private photos of Thomas and me, clearly taken from his personal collection, alongside quotes attributed to him describing our marriage in unflattering terms. I was portrayed as cold, controlling, obsessed with work, and emotionally unavailable. a caricature of the driven female executive too busy for personal connections. More concerning were the references to my management style at Harlow Technologies, suggesting a pattern of manipulation and intimidation that extended from my personal life to my professional one. "When was this published?" I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral despite the anger building inside me. 20 minutes ago, Eliza replied. "It's already been shared over 5,000 times on social media." I nodded, handing back the tablet. "Contact Marcus. I want this site's ownership investigated immediately, and have PR monitor social media response. Let's see how much traction this gets before we decide on a response." "Yes, Ms. Harlow." Eliza hesitated. "There's one more thing. Ms. Reed, Thomas's friend, has been trying to reach you. She's called the office 3 times this morning. Melissa Reed. The paralegal. The other woman. The one who'd believed Thomas's promises of a life together in my house. What does she want?" "She wouldn't say, only that it's urgent and personal." I considered, ignoring the calls. What could Thomas's girlfriend possibly have to say that would interest me now? But curiosity, the same quality that had driven me to build a technology empire, won out. "If she calls again, put her through." Eliza nodded and withdrew, leaving me to contemplate this latest development. Thomas had signed the divorce papers, agreed to the settlement, and supposedly left for Chicago. Yet now he was giving interviews to gossip blogs, attempting to damage my reputation in ways that couldn't possibly benefit him. Unless, of course, someone else was benefiting. Someone who had been unusually quiet throughout this entire ordeal. I picked up my phone and called Marcus. "I need everything you can find on Melissa Reed. Not just her employment at Reed Paralegal Services, but her entire background, family, connections, financial situation, social media presence, everything." "You think she's more involved than we thought?" Marcus asked. "I think it's time to find out exactly who Thomas has been sharing our house with," I replied, "and why she's suddenly so eager to speak with me." As I ended the call, my private line rang, an unknown number. I answered with a simple, "This is Emily Harlow." Ms. Harlow. A woman's voice, younger than mine, but with a hardness that suggested experience beyond her years. "This is Melissa Reed. We need to talk about Thomas." "So I've heard," I replied, coolly. "What exactly is so urgent, Ms. Reed?" "Not over the phone," she insisted. "In person. Today." "I'm afraid my schedule doesn't allow for impromptu meetings with my husband's mistress." Her laugh was short and bitter. "I'm not his mistress. I never was. And once you hear what I have to tell you, you'll understand why this meeting is in both our interests." Something in her tone gave me pause. A certainty that didn't match the desperate text messages from just days ago. "The Mercury Lounge," I said finally. "Private room in the back, 6 o'clock. "I'll be there," she replied, and disconnected. I sat back in my chair, contemplating this unexpected development. The Mercury Lounge was discreet, upscale, and, most importantly, equipped with state-of-the-art security and recording systems installed by none other than Harlow Technologies. Whatever Melissa Reed wanted to tell me, I would ensure it was thoroughly documented. The Mercury Lounge lived up to its name, walls of brushed silver, lighting that cast everything in cool blue tones, and an atmosphere of discreet exclusivity. I arrived 15 minutes early, allowing Diana to sweep the private room while I waited at the bar, nursing a sparkling water with lime. "Room's clean," she confirmed, returning to take up a position near the entrance. "Audio and video systems active." "Thank you, Diana." I checked my watch, 5:58 p.m. "When Ms. Reed arrives, give us 5 minutes, then position yourself outside the door." Right on time, Melissa Reed entered the lounge. She was dressed professionally in a tailored navy suit that spoke of ambition rather than seduction. Her blonde, Hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, makeup minimal. Nothing like the eager young woman who had wandered through my home, touching my things, planning her future in my space. She spotted me immediately, approaching with confident strides. Up close, I could see a sharpness in her eyes that hadn't been visible on the security footage, an intelligence I'd underestimated. "Ms. Harlow," she greeted me with a nod. "Thank you for meeting me." "Ms. Reed," I gestured toward the private room. "Shall we?" Once seated in the secluded space, doors closed against curious ears, we assessed each other openly. The pretense of politeness fell away, replaced by wary calculation. "You're not what I expected," I admitted finally, breaking the silence. She smiled thinly. "Neither are you. You said this meeting was in both our interests. I'm listening." Melissa reached into her handbag and removed a flash drive, placing it carefully on the table between us. "Do you know who I actually work for, Ms. Harlow?" "Reed Paralegal Services," I replied. "Though I suspect you're about to tell me that's not the full story." "It's a shell company," she confirmed. "A very good one, with legitimate clients and proper documentation. But its primary purpose is intelligence gathering for Worthington Capital. James Worthington, Thomas's so-called friend and financial backer." The pieces began falling into place. "Your corporate intelligence," I surmised, reassessing the woman. "Before me. Not a love-struck paralegal, but a professional operative." She nodded. "James Worthington has been trying to access Harlow Technologies for 3 years. Your husband provided the perfect opportunity. So the affair was a job," she finished. "Get close to Thomas, gather information on you and your company, help Worthington find leverage for a hostile takeover." I leaned back, absorbing this new reality. "And now you're telling me this because?" "Because Worthington is planning to burn everyone involved, including me, to protect himself." She tapped the flash drive. "This contains everything, recorded. Conversations, emails, financial transfers. He orchestrated all of it. Thomas's embezzlement, the contact with journalists, even the gossip blog piece. He's been manipulating Thomas from the beginning." "Why come to me?" I asked, not touching the drive. "Worthington is dangerous when cornered." Her laugh was cold and brittle. "Because you're more dangerous, and because I don't appreciate being set up as the fall person for financial crimes I was directed to facilitate." Now we reached the heart of it. Self-preservation. Melissa Reed wasn't confessing out of moral obligation but to save herself. "The foundation funds," I said slowly. "Worthington directed Thomas to divert them?" She nodded. "Through me, I created the shell companies, managed the accounts. Thomas believed we were building a nest egg for our future. In reality, Worthington was creating an evidence trail leading directly to Thomas and me, while keeping his own hands clean." "Exactly. The $50,000 loan to Thomas, that was meant to be traced. Everything was designed to make it look like Thomas and I conspired to embezzle from the foundation, with no connection to Worthington." I finally picked up the flash drive, turning it over in my fingers. "And what do you want in exchange for this?" "Immunity," she replied without hesitation. "I'll testify against Worthington, provide all evidence, cooperate fully with any investigation. In return, I want written assurance that Harlow Technologies and the Foundation won't pursue charges against me. You seduced my husband, helped steal from my foundation, and planned to move into my home," I reminded her coolly. "That's quite a lot to overlook." "I was doing my job," she countered. "One I'm very good at, as it happens. Skills that could be valuable to someone like you. You're offering your services? I'm offering information that will take down James Worthington and protect your company from what's coming next. What you do with that information, and with me, is your decision." I studied her carefully, recognizing the same calculating intelligence I prized in my own executives. She had betrayed Worthington without a second thought when it served her interests. She would do the same to me if circumstances changed. "I'll need to verify what's on this drive," I said finally. "Of course." She stood, smoothing her skirt. "You have my number when you've made your decision." As she reached the door, I asked one last question. "Did Thomas know? About your real employer?" Melissa paused, her expression softening slightly. "No." That part was convincing because it was easy. He was so desperate to feel important, to have someone look up to him. All I had to do was admire him, and he told me everything. After she left, Diana entered immediately. "We got everything, audio and video clean. Have it sent to Marcus right away," I instructed. "And arrange for Eliza to clear my schedule tomorrow morning. It seems I'll be having breakfast with the FBI. 24 hours later, I sat in my office watching a very different scene unfold on the security monitors. FBI agents were escorting James Worthington from his gleaming downtown offices, his hands cuffed behind his back, his face ashen with shock. Marcus had worked through the night with the evidence from Melissa's drive, presenting a comprehensive case to federal authorities by dawn. The documentation was irrefutable: recordings of Worthington directing Thomas to misappropriate specific funds, emails outlining the scheme to frame them both, detailed financial trails leading back to Worthington Capital. They found an additional $3.2 million in fraudulent transactions, Marcus reported, setting a folder on my desk. "Worthington has been systematically targeting charitable foundations for years, using similar tactics. Your husband wasn't the first patsy, just the most recent. And Ms. Reed? Cooperating fully as promised. The prosecutors have offered her a deal in exchange for testimony." I nodded, unsurprised. Melissa Reed was nothing if not adaptable. "And Thomas?" "Still in Chicago. The FBI interviewed him this morning. He's devastated would be the appropriate word. Claimed complete ignorance of Worthington's involvement." Which was likely true. Thomas had been a pawn, albeit a willing one, in a game much larger than his personal resentments. "Will they charge him?" I asked, finding myself strangely concerned about the answer. Marcus shrugged. "Probably, but with reduced charges given his cooperation and the evidence of Worthington's manipulation. He'll face consequences, but not nearly as severe as Worthington." I gazed out at the Boston skyline, feeling an unexpected sense of closure. Thomas had betrayed me, yes, but he'd also been betrayed. By his friend, by his lover, by his own desperation to matter. "The press is already calling," Marcus continued. "They want a statement from you about Worthington's arrest and his connection to the foundation embezzlement." "Tell them I'll provide a statement tomorrow," I replied. "Today I have more important matters to address." Those matters included a call to Janet Pierce at the foundation, outlining what we'd learned and how it would affect the ongoing investigation. She was appropriately shocked at Worthington's involvement, but relieved that the foundation's reputation would be fully cleared. By early evening, I found myself alone in the house that had nearly become the center of another woman's life. Woman who had never wanted it for itself but only as a stepping stone in a complex corporate conspiracy. I wandered through the rooms that had been merely showpieces for so long, seeing them with fresh eyes. The living room where Thomas and I had entertained countless guests, the kitchen where we'd rarely cooked together, the garden I loved but had never fully enjoyed. My phone rang. Thomas. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. "Hello, Thomas." "Emily." His voice sounded hollow, exhausted. "I don't know what to say." "There's nothing to say," I replied, settling onto the window seat overlooking my roses. "Worthington played us both." "You didn't deserve any of this," he said quietly. I made terrible choices. Let resentment and ego drive me, and I never saw what was happening, not really." "No," I agreed. "You didn't." The silence stretched between us, 8 years of marriage condensed into unspoken regrets. The prosecutors say you haven't pressed charges, he finally continued. That you've actually supported leniency in my case. The Foundation's work is too important to be overshadowed by a prolonged legal battle, I explained, the same reason I'd given Marcus when he questioned my decision. And Worthington is the true architect of this situation. That's generous of you. It's practical, I corrected, though we both knew there was more to it than that. Goodbye, Thomas. I ended the call before he could respond. There was nothing more to say, nothing to salvage from what we had once built together. The divorce was finalized 3 days later in a private hearing that Thomas did not attend. The settlement remained at $100,000, a fraction of my worth, but enough for him to rebuild some semblance of a life after the legal proceedings against him concluded. James Worthington faced multiple federal charges, his reputation and business empire collapsing under the weight of evidence provided by Melissa Reed. She disappeared shortly after giving her deposition, reportedly taking a position with a private intelligence firm in Europe. 1 month after Thomas moved out, I began the renovations, not just of the master bedroom as I'd originally planned, but of the entire house. Wall colors changed, furniture was replaced, the garden expanded. I turned Thomas's former study into a library filled with the books I'd always wanted to read, but never made time for. The Foundation flourished under new leadership, its reputation strengthened rather than damaged by the transparency with which we'd handled the crisis. Harlow Technologies completed its quantum computing initiative, with Garrett Wilson's exclusive feature generating precisely the positive coverage we'd hoped for. 6 months after signing the divorce papers, I stood in my garden at dawn, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over my roses. They were in full bloom, their scent filling the air with a sweetness that had always reminded me of possibilities. My phone chimed with a message from Eliza. Car arriving in 30 minutes for the airport. Tokyo team confirms all preparations complete. For tomorrow's presentation. I sent a quick acknowledgement, then set the phone aside. The empire I'd built was thriving, expanding into new markets, developing technologies that would change the world. The personal betrayal that had threatened to derail everything had instead revealed weaknesses that had been addressed and strengthened. Thomas had never understood what drove me, had seen only ambition where there was purpose, coldness where there was focus. In trying to claim what was mine, he had lost everything he truly had. As for me, I had learned valuable lessons about trust, vigilance, and the importance of seeing people for who they truly were. I had eliminated vulnerabilities, both personal and professional, and I had reclaimed spaces, physical and emotional, that had been compromised. The morning light caught the roses, turning their petals to flame. My mother's voice echoed in my memory. The most beautiful gardens are those that have been properly pruned, Emily. You have to cut away what doesn't serve the plant to allow for new growth. I smiled at the wisdom of it, at the truth that applied to businesses and lives as well as gardens. Thomas, Melissa, Worthington, all pruned away, allowing for something stronger to emerge. The house was truly mine now, in every sense. And so was the life I would build within it, on my terms, with clear eyes and hard-won wisdom. Some lessons came at a terrible price, but the most valuable ones always did. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.